uh,
Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. We're going to continue our reading and discussion of the book The Global Vatican by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. We're taking an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship, the prophetic relationship between the United States and the so-called Holy See. Again, the author of the book, Francis Rooney, and you can get this you can get this book from Rowman and Littlefield and other major book outlets. I highly recommend the book. And more than that, I highly recommend some Protestant understanding of this book, which is rare today. And we're very, very blessed to be able to present a Protestant understanding of this book on Inquisition Update here on First Amendment Radio. We're going to continue now the last full paragraph on page 86 in chapter 7 of the book, entitled The World at War, Part 2, the 1-2 punch as retaliation for the Protestant Reformation and the French Revolution. The Vatican is going on a tirade and a crusade against Germany, the very seat of the Protestant Reformation. And the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was cooperative with it. And I believe secretly knew exactly what this crusade was all about. And despite his profession of Protestantism, he served his Jesuit general. He served his worshipful master of the Masonic Lodge that he belonged to, 33rd degree, and was simply a Jesuit plant in the White House. And because he had the White House, he had use of the immense military might of the United States to help in the eventual goal of conquering the whole world for the papacy. The second beast of Revelation chapter 13 is the United States of America, and it causes the whole world to worship the first beast, which is the papacy. Now we're dealing with Pope Pius XII, Hitler, and the Second World War, and we're talking about the public information that was surrounding the secret crusade that the Vatican was waging. He says, sometimes lost in the controversy surrounding Pope Pius XII and the Holocaust, or rather, excuse me, we'll continue with the last full paragraph on page 87. 87, the following page. He said, less important than who said what at the lunch is that it occurred. We're talking about this private little luncheon that President Roosevelt had at his mother's house with the current Secretary of State of Vatican City, the future Pope, Pope Pius XII, Eugenio Pacelli, the one who signed the Concordat with Hitler in 1933. He says, less important than who said what at the lunch is that it occurred. An American president meeting with a high Vatican official gave a tangible and clear signal of a fundamental shift in relations between the United States and the Holy See. We talked about that shift yesterday. I refer to yesterday's broadcast as what that shift was. It was simply that the shift was that the Protestants no longer had influence in the United States. And the Catholics just simply took over. The Roman Catholic hierarchy took over the White House. There was all of a sudden clear sailing for a full-fledged relationship between Protestant USA and the Antichrist of the Bible. That's what happens when Protestants go to sleep. The wolf just waltzes right in and takes over. The Roman wolf, let me be clear. He said that shift was soon reflected in the diplomatic activity, albeit still unofficial, which picked up after Pacelli's visit. At first, the United States State Department looked to the Vatican as a possible peacekeeper in Europe. Remember, it's the United States State Department. It's the presidency of the United States together with Pacelli, together with Hitler, together with Stalin, that are orchestrating this entire war. They all answer to the Jesuit general. Remember, the Jesuits took over the papacy after the supposed suppression of the Jesuits by Pope Clement XIV, and then after the suppression, after having led the French Revolution and punished the papal monarchs of Europe and the papacy, they were reinstated by the papacy, but on certain terms. The Jesuits control the popes. All right, the Jesuit general, the Pope, in this case Pope Pius XII, 33rd degree Freemason, Roosevelt. We have Adolf Hitler and Stalin all working together to orchestrate this crusade. And what we're reading about is the public fodder that covered up this cooperative effort to lead a bloodthirsty crusade all over Europe. He says, at first, the United States State Department looked to the Vatican as a possible peacekeeper in Europe, hoping that the church would influence the Italian government, remember, led by fascist Mussolini, which might in turn moderate German government's aggression. In other words, we're going to try to go through the Pope to simmer down Mussolini, and if we can get Mussolini under control, maybe he'll have some influence on Adolf Hitler to try to tone down what Hitler's doing. It's all just theater. All the world is a stage. Now, when it became clear that no force or man could moderate Adolf Hitler, why? Because he was answering to the Jesuit general. Okay? He said the United States came to prize the Vatican as a listening post. Quote, I think it's unquestionable, wrote Secretary of State Sumner Welles in 1939, memo to the President, quote, that the Vatican has many sources of information, particularly with regard to what is actually going on in Germany, Italy, and Spain, unquote. So the Vatican is acknowledged here as the premier intelligence gathering apparatus in existence at the time. And the United States is going to avail itself of that intelligence through a warmer and closer relationship between the United States government, the State Department, and the Vatican. The Church of Antichrist is the best source of information. Why? Because they're leading the crusade. It's not difficult to understand. He said the intelligence coming out of those countries from the church prelates was useful. And while embassies were shutting down all around Europe, the Vatican remained one place where diplomats from the belligerent countries and many non-belligerents were still doing business. So here's this dependence now, almost rather a dependence of the United States on the Vatican for information during this war. It's called Central Headquarters. Okay? Commander-in-Chief of the crusade is the Pope. And what he says publicly does not match with what he was saying privately. Okay? Just, I want you to comprehend, the Vatican's not going to openly proclaim itself the head of this crusade and take all the blame for it. No, he deceives the whole world. The whole world. And he deceived you, and he deceived me, and he deceived the State Department And there's only just a few people at the top that really know what's going on. The Jesuit general and the people that I mentioned before, the papacy, the president, Adolf Hitler, and Stalin. They're all working together. Now, he says, by more covert methods, the United States State Department began collaborating with the official Vatican newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, to air anti-fascist views. This is all just cover, because they're all working together. And it says speeches from the U.S. State Department officials or even the president himself found their way unedited into the paper. That is the Vatican's official newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano. So the State Department and the President of the United States are communicating publicly all over the world through the Vatican newspaper. All other means of communication have been disconnected. Central headquarters. Now, he says the conduit for these speeches, in other words, the pathway between the President and the State Department to the Vatican newspaper, was Father Joseph P. Hurley. That means he was a Roman Catholic prelate. Okay? An American Monsignor from Cleveland, Hurley followed Cardinal Spellman as the second American prelate to work in a high position inside the Vatican. So we've got Hurley and Spellman both helping to conduct this crusade. And they are the somewhat covered conduit of information, both from the United States State Department and the presidency to the Vatican, and from the Vatican back to the United States State Department and presidency. The Crusaders, Cardinal Spellman and Hurley, they're the vessels through which information passes between the second beast of Revelation 13 and the first beast of Revelation 13, and vice versa. He says, an American Monsignor from Cleveland, Hurley followed Cardinal Spellman as the second American prelate to work in a high position inside the Vatican. Hurley's passions beyond his religious faith were his love for America and his hatred of Nazis. With the apparent blessing of Vatican superiors, Hurley began secretly meeting with U.S. Ambassador to Italy, William A. Phillips, to receive news items of interest from the United States. Hurley would then pass these to the editors of L'Osservatore Romano, into which they would often go verbatim, then circulate into Rome at large. So, the United States is communicating with Rome through these Roman Catholic prelates, Spellman and Hurley. This was a terrific feat of anti-fascist propaganda at a time when at a time when Italian papers were heavily censored and one-sided. Indeed, it was too good to last. Circulation of the paper outside Vatican walls was banned by the Italian government in November of 1940. Excuse me. Now, he says Holy See-U.S. relations took another momentous turn on October 2nd, 1939, 5 months after Pope Pius XII's installation as Pope. Franklin Roosevelt wrote a memo to his Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, suggesting, quote, a special minister or ambassador on special mission to the Vatican, unquote. So here's another attempt of the American government. First it was Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, now Franklin Roosevelt, attempting to make an ambassadorship, a formal, acknowledged ambassadorship with the whore of Revelation chapter 13, the first beast. A Protestant country trying its best subtly as possible to create a formal diplomatic relationship with the first beast. It said initially Roosevelt saw the mission as being useful in dealing with the Catholic refugees he expected to flood out of war-torn Europe, but the mission's scope soon became much broader. Much broader. Yeah, you're going to let the fox in, you as well let all his buddies in too, right? Now, he says sending an American envoy to the Vatican was going to be politically difficult. The president would have to navigate around opposition from American Protestants. They don't have to worry about such things today. But President Franklin Roosevelt had to worry at least a little bit about some protests that might be waged if the United States got too chummy with the Antichrist of the Bible. Not a problem today. We're gonna let the fox actually traipse all through Congress this fall. He's coming to admonish the United States and to take control of foreign and domestic policy. He's going to make a public appearance in Congress this fall. Don't miss it. September, I can't remember the date right off the top of my head. But the Antichrist of the Bible is literally going to come and admonish Congress, a joint session of Congress this fall. No, there won't be any protest. At least not anywhere but a few rare, priceless Protestant voices that won't be heard. They don't get major airtime. It's just on little operations like First Amendment Radio where we get to spout off. But we're not heard anywhere. And certainly if we were heard anywhere, the Protestant voice would just fall to the ground. I mean, everybody's futurist. Nobody believes the Pope's the Antichrist. We believe that the Pope is a peacemaker in the world. And we believe that the Pope is, well, the savior of the world. He's going to save us from economic ruin. He's going to save us from social ruin. He's going to save us from environmental ruin. He's going to save us. You know, they no longer believe in Jesus. They believe in the Pope, the counterfeit Jesus. The Bible calls him the Antichrist, made of flesh and blood, sinful flesh and blood like the rest of us, but he's given the voice of God, and people listen to him. The President of the United States listens to him. The Supreme Court listens to him. Congress has invited him to come and speak. I want you to ask yourself the question, what consequence does that have for Bible-believing Christians who understand and read the prophecies of Daniel and understand what role the papacy plays in the world? What biblical, historical, and prophetic role the papacy plays in America and in the world? It doesn't bode well for us. Okay? Initially, Roosevelt saw the mission as being useful in dealing with Catholic refugees he expected to flood out of World War II torn Europe, but the mission scope soon became much broader. Sending an American envoy to the Vatican was going to be politically difficult. The president would have to navigate around opposition from American Protestants, many of whom might view an envoy to the Pope as an affront to their religion. No, it's not an affront to our religion. It's an affront to Jesus Christ, the real King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's not an affront to our religion. It's an affront to our God. Okay? Protestants, many of whom might view an envoy to the Pope as an affront to their religion and an abridgment to the constitutional separation of church and state. Certainly, one cannot argue that developing formal diplomatic relations with the quote-unquote Holy See is indeed an abridgment of the constitutional separation of church and state and the non-establishment clause. All right? This consideration recommended making as little fuss as possible about the envoy, slipping him into Rome without fanfare. But that strategy too carried risks. A quiet process lacking formality and publicity would diminish the envoy's stature and undermine his credibility in Europe and the Vatican. Caught between a political rock and a diplomatic hard place, Roosevelt resolved the situation by naming his envoy as a quote-unquote personal representative of the president. That's right. We're going to call the first envoy, well, really the second. Wilson tried it earlier. We're going to call this new U.S. ambassador to the Holy See just a personal representative of the president. That's the way we get around the Constitution. We've learned a lesson a long time ago from the Jesuits. You can shuffle Satan right to the head of the class, right to the, behind the podiums to teach the world a lesson. All you got to do is change his name once in a while. Okay? Just change his name. The whole world is just that easily deceived. You just put him in different garb, put him in, give him a different appearance, give him a different name, and you're off to the races again. Okay? President Roosevelt's just simply going to call this ambassador to the first beast. He's just going to call him president, personal representative of the president. It worked. It worked. He says, though the envoy would not hold the formal title of U.S. ambassador, the president insisted he be given a rank equal to ambassador. So this personal representative, which that's what went out over the airwaves, and America just gobbled it up like it was candy, he was to be given all the responsibility and prestige and recognition and authority as an ambassador. See? All you got to do is just change the name. He's not an ambassador to the U.S., from the U.S. to the Holy See. Why? He's just a personal representative of the president. Just going to go have tea and crumpets with the Pope. In the meantime, Protestants are getting ready to die in a papal proxy war against Protestants in Germany. American Protestants learning how to fly B-29s, learning how to drop bombs, learning how to drop fire bombs over the most beautiful Protestant city in Germany. That's what happened. Dresden wasn't a military target. It should never have been targeted from a military point of view. But they firebombed it, killing God knows how many Bible-believing Protestants in the heart of the Protestant Reformation. The U.S. 8th Air Force, they thought they were doing God's bidding, but they were deceived by the Antichrist and by his Jesuit general and by their 33rd degree president, Franklin Roosevelt. Yep, they learned how to fly B-29s, big bombers. They all got to wear a fancy uniform. They all got to have a parade celebrating their heroism after the Second World War. I wonder if the truth really sets in about what they accomplished for the Pope, if they're still proud of their military career. The man Roosevelt named as envoy, Myron C. Taylor, the 66-year-old former president of U.S. Steel Corporation, made the appointment easier for the critics to accept, that is, the Protestants. See, Taylor was one of the country's most highly regarded businessmen, a generous philanthropist, and a devout Episcopalian. Supposed to be Protestant? No. Not much. He served the Jesuit general too. the first personal representative to the Pope was an Episcopalian. That ought to satisfy the Protestants. We'll be back right after these messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And if you'd like to hear Inquisition Update continue on First Amendment Radio, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And if you'd like to contact me directly, if you're getting it, many people have written, say, I'm getting it. You can do so by emailing me directly, tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. And if you too are getting it, even if you're not, if you have questions or comments, please write. I enjoy hearing from my listeners. Now, many people might say that I'm unfairly besmirching Myron C. Taylor, the first quote-unquote personal representative of President Roosevelt to the quote-unquote Holy See. I mean, after all, he was an Episcopalian. Isn't that part of the Church of England? Church of England's Protestant, isn't it? Church of England? Episcopalian? That's a denomination of Protestantism, isn't it? Let me ask you a question. Would any true Bible-believing Protestant who understands Daniel's prophecies, who understands that the papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist of the Bible, do you think a Bible-believing Protestant Episcopalian would volunteer as the personal representative of the president with full ambassador authority and power to represent the United States to the Antichrist of the Bible? I wonder if Myron C. Taylor was also a Freemason. Anyway, the man Roosevelt named as envoy, Myron C. Taylor, the 66-year-old former president of U.S. Steel Corporation, made the appointment easier for the Protestants to accept. It says critics, but you know who the critics would be. It would be Bible-believing Protestants. I mean, the author even named. Roosevelt had to tiptoe lightly on this subject so as not to upset the critics, the Protestants. It says he was also a man of sterling reputation who, despite his prominence, shunned the limelight, making him perfect for a discreet and sensitive assignment. All the better that he owed a villa in Tuscany, which put him close to Rome, and that his generous wealth meant that he required no pay, and hence no approval from Congress. So the president assigns himself an ambassador to the Vatican for the United States and doesn't even go through Congress. That sounds familiar, doesn't it, to those who keep up with current events in Washington? Roosevelt skirted the Constitution, skirted the Bill of Rights, skirted Congress, skirted the American people, and just opened up the lines of formal communication between himself and his general in Washington, or in Rome, rather. You know what I call it? I call it high crimes and misdemeanors. That's what I call it. But worse than that, I call it treason against the throne of Almighty God. But it's no problem if you're a 33rd degree Freemason who answers to your Jesuit general and your quote-unquote worshipful master of the lodge. So the rich man, Myron C. Taylor, U.S. Steel Corporation. Should we do business with U.S. Steel? I wonder who really owns U.S. Steel. I think if you read the book, The Vatican Billions, you'll find out that the Vatican owns the principal stock of U.S. Steel Corporation. Myron C. Taylor might well have called himself an Episcopalian, but he was not Protestant. And neither was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It says all the better that he owned a villa in Tuscany, this rich man from U.S. Steel, which put him close to Rome, I wonder why he owned a villa in Tuscany. What, you suppose it might be so that he would be close to Rome? And that his generous wealth meant that he required no pay. In other words, he was an unpaid volunteer. That's in order to get around Congress. Well, I mean, after all, we can't have tax money paying. We can't have the taxpayers paying for this unholy relationship between the United States, a former Protestant country, and the seat of Antichrist, can we? Well, that's what Francis Rooney was, though. He was paid by tax money, Protestant tax money, to throw the bed sheets off of the, well, it's just diabolical. But it's inconsequential considering the fact that you and I paid for the Second World War. We're still paying for the Second World War. Why do you think your taxes are so high? Why do you think your national debt is so high? $29 trillion. We can never pay it. We're still paying for the Second World War. We Protestants, we hardworking Protestants are still paying for the Second World War. We're still paying for it. And our grandchildren will still be paying for it. You see, we're enslaved because of papal proxy wars. You have to work at least a third of your life to pay for your own destruction. Spiritually and temporally. Is this sinking in? Is anybody out there really beginning to comprehend what I'm telling you? And what about the current crusade that we're waging against the so-called Muslim world? Do you know the only reason we're fighting the Muslims now is that they could put a wrench in the cog of the wheel that is turning in Israel right now. The Pope has to fulfill his futurist, phony, Jesuit-inspired futurist interpretation of Daniel 9:27. There's got to be a temple. There's got to be a peace treaty, a 7-year peace treaty. There's got to be animal sacrifices in Israel with Jews living in the land, and the Muslims just might throw a monkey wrench into the fulfillment of the Pope's phony futurist interpretation of Daniel 9:27. That show must go on, or the Protestants might wake up. Look, even an ecumenical evangelibelly knows that if the prophecies are not fulfilled, then it was not a prophet who spoke it. Now, so far, they're on board. Israel became a nation in 1948. Jews now live in the land, and they're building all the components for this temple so that all they have to do is carry it up the mountain and set it up. They've got all the vestments of the priest. They've got the ashes of the red heifer to sanctify the temple. They've got the candelabra, or the menorah, they call it. They've got the table of showbread. They've got it all done. All they got to do is have the go-ahead from the Pope to set it up. But the Muslims are still a threat, you see, because they think that mountain belongs to their prophet. And so we've got to tame those Muslims so that the Pope can proceed with his futurism. They say that the papacy is not the Antichrist of the Bible, that it's just going to be one man who's going to sign a peace treaty with the Jews and allow them to begin animal sacrifices again. Sacrifices that cannot wash away sin, by the way. And we're fighting another crusade for the Pope to secure Mount Moriah. What does the Bible say? He would gather all the nations, all the armies of the world against Jerusalem. He said he would make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to the whole world. Isn't that what's happening? There's the true prophet. What meddling should the United States have over Jerusalem when God clearly says he will pour out his wrath upon all those who are gathered together against it? Do Protestants even read their Bibles anymore? Not only do they not know that the Pope's the Antichrist, they don't understand the Vatican was running the Second World War. They don't understand that the Vatican's running the current crusade against the Muslims. They don't know that, they don't realize that our incalculable debt is due to all these papal proxy wars, just so the Pope can fulfill that most important future 7-year period of time. It's all a lie. Jesus fulfilled the 70th week of Daniel. His ministry was 7 years. That 70th week came immediately after the 69th week. That 70th week began the moment Jesus was baptized in the river by John. 7 years later, Stephen was stoned. In the midst of the week, Jesus became the lamb and gave up his own life and thereby caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. God's not going to accept any more animal sacrifices from Jews. I don't care how beautiful their temple is. I don't care how precisely they follow God's law in the animals in the ritual of animal sacrifices. That house is left unto them desolate. Even if they rebuild it, it will be destroyed. But the entire United States is paying, every day, paying a debt they will never, ever see the end of. They'll never retire the debt against all the papal proxy wars that are waging even today, that Roosevelt was waging during the Second World War, all to enslave us and all to create this magnificent theater on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. Look, when you start to grasp this, the magnitude and the extent of the delusion is mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. I am amazed every day, and I mean every day, when I contemplate the level of ignorance, the level of depravity, the level of spiritual ineptitude, Bible ignorance that is demonstrated every day by Christians around the world who fail to comprehend how utterly we have been deceived. And people would ask me, Tom, how could a conspiracy so vast survive? How could it not been blown out of the water? You can't keep a secret. That many people involved in perpetrating all these atrocities throughout the world, setting us up for this 7-year period of time. It's not possible, Tom. It's beyond the realm of probability. But they fail to remember that they don't have to directly conspire. You see, Satan is the grand conspirator. And he simply orchestrates them all. They worship him. They worship him. And he inspires them all. Now, certainly a Bible-believing Christian can understand the concept. We're all driven by a common spirit. We should all agree, whether we've conferred with one another or not. The Spirit of God dwelling in all of us puts us in the same mind. When we gather together, we are all in one accord, aren't we? Well, what brings that unity? A common spirit. A spirit of holiness. Well, the same works for Satan's minions, too. So while it appears on its face that I'm offering up to you a conspiracy so vast, so complex, so delicate, that it could never have survived past the conception stage, I can turn right around and show you how it's almost an assurity that a conspiracy that vast, that delicate, that orchestrated could be conducted without the conference of all the participants. They're simply of like mind. Satan plays the tune and they'd all dance to the music as if they know the music. And still people won't believe me. But I challenge anybody to find a better explanation for the evil that dominates this world today. And don't dare to even try to call it anti-Roman Catholic bashing. This book was written by a Roman Catholic. He's exposing Washington's cozy, intimate, incestuous relationship with the whore of Rome. And I use the term incestuous wisely. It's the same family in bed together. Now, it says, by the time Myron Taylor arrived in Rome in late February of 1940, World War II was well underway. That's right. You can't have the Savior riding into town too early. After all, this crusade has to carry on. It says the German army had invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, and France and England had immediately declared war on Germany. Yay! Full steam ahead, crusade! We're going to have a bloodbath in Europe. Of course, you can count on Protestant England to do what the Pope's bidding in the world too, can't you? The Church of England has been infiltrated by the Jesuits, by the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, they're sending Church of England prelates to Rome, and they're converting to Roman Catholicism. You know, Winston Churchill was a Freemason. That's why England does what it does. Freemasonry controls England just as much as it controls the United States of America. They're all in bed together. He says, though President Roosevelt originally directed Taylor to deal mainly with refugees, that's really what it was supposed to be all about, just concern for Roman Catholic refugees coming out of war-torn Europe into the United States. I mean, after all, the United States has been, a collection zone for every Roman Catholic. You remember the Holy Alliance between the Jesuits, the papacy, and the monarchs of Europe. They got together at Chieti, Italy, and decided they were going to, have a mass migration of criminal Roman Catholics in the prisons. They're going to ship them over to the United States to help make America Catholic. Immigration's always been the main opportunity for Rome to Catholicize America. So, 33rd degree Freemason, Jesuit controlled Roosevelt was all concerned about these Roman Catholic refugees. And that's the explanation he gave for making this personal representative to the Pope, Myron C. Taylor. He says, though President Roosevelt originally directed Taylor to deal mainly with refugees, the envoy's task list expanded to encompass a broad range of issues. So he became an official representative, ambassador to the Holy See. It wasn't just about refugees. It was about conducting a crusade, man. He says, more immediately, per Roosevelt's wishes, Taylor hoped to enlist the Pope in keeping Italy from joining the war on Hitler's side. Okay, that's for mass consumption. I mean, we have to make it appear like we don't want an alliance between fascist Mussolini and fascist Hitler. Can't wake up those Protestants. He says this goal met with disappointment in June of 1940 when Italy joined Germany and declared war against France and England. He said a second key task for Taylor was to persuade the Pope to modify the Church's position on the Soviet Union. The president wanted to extend the American Lend-Lease program. That's right, we want Protestant money, Protestant ingenuity, Protestant industry to help supply Russia. And we're not going to charge them anything. Just vast millions of dollars of resources pumped into Russia because we're going to use Russia for a future crusade. It's called the Cold War. You know, if you want to hide a crime, just declare a war and turn the whole world into chaos. Then you can go about killing whoever you want. And you can explain it away as just a consequence of war. But Roosevelt, having sympathies with his 33rd degree Freemason in Russia, wanted this Lend-Lease program. And the United States bought it. Or, no, they paid for it. Okay? The president wanted to extend the American Lend-Lease program to the Soviets, but he knew the Catholic Church strongly objected to any dealings with the communist regime. In 1937, Pope Pius XI had declared in his encyclical Divini Redemptoris that communism, quote, is intrinsically wrong, and no one who would save Christian civilization, that is, the Roman Catholic Church, may collaborate with it in any undertaking whatsoever, unquote. God has spoken, right? We're not going to support godless communism. Well, at least publicly. Now, those words put patriotic American Catholics in a moral bind. Supporting the Lend-Lease program to the Soviets meant defying their Pope. Just a small little hitch in their get-along now, right? It says Roosevelt hoped the Pope, with Taylor's encouragement, would soften the anti-Soviet sentiment of the encyclical. Here, Taylor met with some success. The Vatican quietly sent out word to American clergy that Divini Redemptoris, while condemning communism and the Soviet system, was not meant as a condemnation of the Soviet people. A certain amount of cooperation with Russia, in other words, was permissible. You see, the Antichrist isn't infallible. He's not infallible. So I had to, back up the truck a little bit. Look, we have the Pope lecturing the world about communism. Then why is the whole world becoming communistic? It's bait and switch. It's bait and switch. And what we're going to get in this New World Order is an eclectic mix of every form of government that the Vatican has experimented with over the last 2,000 years. It's going to be communistic, it's going to be fascist, it's going to be democratic, it's going to be Republican, but it's going to be papal. above all things. And we're going to pay for it with our blood and our guts and our tax money. We ought to all be on our knees in repentance before the Lord. I'll see you next week.